The president has done nothing but make your life more difficult. Medicaid is under attack. Social Security offices are closing by the dozens. Food assistance, rental assistance, energy assistance, all on the chopping block. There is no end to the destruction. The first 114 days of this administration have been one bad deal after another for American families. But if your last name is Trump, these 114 days have been just about the greatest deal of all time. New airplanes from your friends in the Gulf, new hotel deals, new golf courses, new meme coins, new towers, new income is flowing in to the Trump family. You name it. Donald Trump and his family are cashing in. So today, I want to highlight just a few of those deals for the Trump family.
What if I told you Trump's policies are causing a brain drain in America? Schiff's explosive speech reveals how the administration's war on research universities is pushing top talent overseas. The long-term consequences could be devastating for U.S. innovation and global competitiveness. What does it take for a congressman to become the face of resistance against a sitting president? In Adam Schiff's case, it started with a mixture of committee power, timing, and a willingness to go on record against someone who thrived on breaking political rules. Most lawmakers spend much of their careers out of the public eye, but as chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Schiff found himself in a spotlight that kept growing brighter with each clash over how the Trump White House used its authority. Schiff was not just another Democratic voice in the Capitol. His seat on the Intelligence Committee meant he had access to briefings, witnesses, and documents many Americans never see. That access, combined with his decision to press Trump's aides over allegations of misconduct, thrust him forward. Suddenly, his measured questions and hearings were replayed on news shows, and his warnings about threats to institutions carried more weight than a routine speech on the House floor. For Trump, however, this visibility turned Schiff into a clear target. Where some saw oversight, an elected official testing the strength of checks and balances, the president often portrayed it as harassment from a political foe. Trump leaned on sharp words, calling Schiff corrupt or mocking him at rallies, painting an image of an enemy who could be dismissed rather than debated. By choosing Schiff as a villain, he encouraged his supporters to see investigations as partisan theater instead of oversight. Schiff did not hold back either. He often warned that the administration was not just bending rules, but actively trying to break down structures that made those rules possible. He claimed Trump undercut alliances that had held for decades and described his leadership as pushing against the rule of law in a way few leaders had done before. To make the point clear, Schiff relied on striking phrases. He spoke of a systematic wrecking ball used against public institutions. He also warned of a war on research universities, arguing that attacks on knowledge and science would leave lasting scars. Those words traveled. They were repeated in news segments, amplified in political speeches, and referenced by commentators who saw Schiff as channeling broader frustration with Trump's style of power. It was a feedback loop. As he grew louder, coverage increased, and with greater coverage, his role as lead critic solidified even more. That role went from vocal to decisive when a whistleblower complaint surfaced. Schiff became central to how Congress handled the allegations, introducing testimony and pushing the argument that impeachment was not just possible, but necessary. Hearings under his direction exposed details that kept the story in public view week after week. That shift from speeches to direct action made him, in many eyes, the main figure holding Trump accountable. Trump's reaction matched the escalation. He accelerated his public mockery, casting Schiff as dishonest and power-hungry. By questioning Schiff's motives and character, Trump tried to blunt the impact of the hearings themselves. But in trying to discredit him, the president only sharpened the contrast. Schiff as the symbol of oversight, Trump as the leader fighting off investigations he labeled unfair. The conflict moved far beyond basic disagreement. Schiff had grown into the symbolic antagonist of Trump's presidency, a role reinforced both by his supporters who saw him defending Democratic guardrails and by Trump's allies who accused him of abusing his position. Both narratives entrenched the divide, setting the stage for even bigger confrontations. And that's where we turn next. Once these accusations hit the air, they didn't just shape hearings or headlines. They created a ripple of conflict that rallied supporters on both sides. What happens when a lawmaker accuses a president of tearing down the very idea of America? That question defined the clash between Adam Schiff and Donald Trump once impeachment entered the spotlight. Schiff had already argued that the administration was eroding trust in key institutions, but during this next phase, his arguments became sharper, his words clearer, and the stakes much higher. When you call out food shortages, cuts to health science, and rising costs that hit everyday households, you are not just speaking in the abstract. You are saying people's lives are directly worsened by political choices. Schiff called out specific policies he believed fueled hunger. He repeatedly pointed to cuts in programs like SNAP. His line was stark: fewer school lunches for kids, and more seniors literally sitting and starving in their homes. He did not stop with food. He also turned to health science, highlighting cuts to the National Institutes of Health. According to him, those cuts meant canceled clinical trials and stalled treatments that could have saved lives. With each argument, Schiff tied policy to kitchen table consequences: higher grocery bills, fewer medical options, jobs lost in the research sector. These were not framed as distant risks, but as costs people could already feel. This approach gave his supporters plenty to rally behind. To them, Schiff was not exaggerating but defending what made the country strong. He embodied the idea of a check on executive power. Democrats painted him as someone who spoke for institutions that outlast any one leader, whether universities, government watchdogs, or health agencies. Supporters said he personified oversight, the kind that keeps democracy from slipping toward abuse. On the other hand, Republicans and Trump's allies claimed Schiff was stretching reality. They accused him of framing every policy dispute as a moral collapse. For them, these attacks on the president looked less like oversight and more like political theater, staged to energize his own side. Their counter-argument was just as direct. Schiff was taking advantage of power in Congress to score points in the media, not to protect democratic norms. And then came the flashpoint, the whistleblower complaint. Schiff read what he said was an account of the concerns linked to Trump's call with Ukraine's president. Supporters saw it as clarifying the seriousness of the claims. Critics, however, accused him of inventing dialogue and misleading the country. That moment became a lightning rod. Right there, in a televised hearing, Schiff turned into both hero and villain depending on who you asked. Trump's camp seized on this. They pushed out the message that Schiff was dishonest, that he bent facts for partisan goals. Conservative media amplified those charges, insisting he leaked sensitive information and abused his congressional role. And Trump himself escalated, mocking Schiff publicly and labeling him as corrupt. This was no longer about one complaint or one hearing. It was an all-out campaign to weaken his credibility. The personal attacks grew intense. There were efforts to dig into his past actions, attempts to pressure him, and waves of statements intended to brand him as untrustworthy. The aim was clear. If they could tarnish Schiff, they could neutralize his criticisms of the president. Here's the bottom line. Schiff's handling of the whistleblower complaint did not just challenge Trump's policies. It escalated his war with the administration itself. At this point, both sides had invested in defining the stakes. Was Schiff exposing corruption, or was he staging political drama? That conflict set the tone for everything that followed. With both sides entrenched, the fight stretched beyond budgets or speeches. It became a struggle over who gets to define what America stands for and who has the authority to say it. Here's what matters. Schiff versus Trump was never only about impeachment. It symbolized a larger struggle over how America defines itself, both at home and on the world stage. Schiff said, "I will never forgive him for the damage he has done to the very idea of America." That captured his claim that the harm went beyond policy, reaching into national identity. So, what this means for you is simple. We have to ask if leaders defend shared values or just use power without limits. The fight continues, and Schiff's words still shape today's debates. Subscribe, like, and share for clear, regular updates.